Some of you might not know me. I hope everybody just about knows me. And I'm crazy. I like to have fun. So we're going to have fun today, but everything that I share with you will be the truth. And we will see that God works in miraculous ways to bring us to Him. And then after that, He will use us when we yield. And so I only have 249 pages. So you know, if you need to go get more food, don't be afraid to. So let's just say a quick prayer before we start. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for all that you do for us and for the way that you change us, Lord, and how you are so patient with us. Father, we just pray that each one here will go away with some kind of thought, Lord, that will either make them want to do something that they've been slacking on, or that they will just know, Lord, that no matter what, you love us, we are yours, and we are worthy. Amen. So I'm going to start out by telling you just a little bit about my family growing up. And I was born in Oswegatchie, New York, which is up north from here. And my mom and dad had 6 of us under 7 years old. Now, my mom was a rip. She was a lot of fun. She was a hard worker, and she made fun happen no matter what. And we had no running water, no inside toilet. My dad was gone all week. He worked as a logger. She had no license, so wherever we went, we walked. And for all of the years of my young life, my mom would walk us a mile to church every Sunday. And I thank her for that. Anyway, my mom, it's a small town that we lived in. And you know how small town people are? Yeah, well, they would say to her, Ruth, why do you have 6 kids under 7? And she's, you know, she really got sick of it. I'm serious, it was true. She really got sick of it. So one day she finally said, you know what, I was deaf. And the woman says, deaf? She said, yeah, Howard would come home from working all week and he'd say, do you want to go to sleep or what? I'd say, what? She said, I got a hearing aid, and that was the end of that. So this is the type of woman I was brought up by. It comes naturally. So, and she did take us to church, and for that I am very, very thankful, because that started us living the way that we should. We've always been a very close family. All of my siblings are alive except for one that died last year. And we live far away from one another, but we stay in touch and do a lot of things. So anyway, I grew up normal life just like anyone else, ups and downs. And because I was a middle child, I kind of had a little complex that, you know, nobody loved me. You know, I was just there. And so about 3 months after I graduated, I married my husband, Bruce. And he was the best thing and is the best thing that has ever happened to me. We were married, and when we first got married, we had a lot of trouble in our marriage because we drank. He had a hot temper, and I was insanely jealous. Now you put that together, and you've got not such a good marriage right away. And so it's just the way it was, and we worked through it. And one of the things that we did at that time, he was a hunter, and we would always go up to my uncle and aunt's hunting cabin up in Harrisville, New York, Pickering actually, and we would stay the weekend. And so we had been married a little over a year, and I had just found out I was expecting a baby a few months before this happened, and we were excited. I was mostly excited because I thought, you know what, this is gonna fix our marriage. And so I thought that would make everything just super good. Don't ever think that. But anyway, into my pregnancy, about 2.5, 3 months, I started having some problems, and the doctor said, well, you need bed rest. So I had gone to bed and stayed in bed for a week or so. And the weekend come, and Bruce asked me, he says, well, what do you think about going to camp? And I said, you know, Bruce, when I get up to camp, my mother and my aunt are going to spoil me rotten. They're not going to let me move. I said, let's go. And so anyway, we get ready to go. And this is what I mean. This man was just so sweet. And he goes and he gets 2 big pillows and puts them on my seat in the car. And when we're driving up, he's driving like 25. You know? He's just taking good care of me. And so anyway, we get to camp and we go in and we're young. You know, I was 18, he was 22. And so we're young, and in this camp, it was very small. Just had a kitchen and some chairs in it. And so that 2 bunk beds, double bunk beds. And so this is what the camp consisted of. So, you know, the old folks wanted to go to bed early because they were going home, which is okay, but for young folks, that's not so good. And so we had taken a radio up in our bed with us, and we had turned it on, and we were listening to it. And actually, the next day after this was my birthday, and this was Halloween night, and when he came home that night, he brought me the most beautiful white fur jacket, not real, but beautiful. And that was the best coat I've ever had in my life. But anyway, it was very sweet. So we get up in camp and we start listening to music, you know, real low so the old timers can sleep. And then all of a sudden they are breaking in and telling us that something big is happening in Buffalo, New York. And so of course we turn it up just a little to listen. And as we listen, they're telling us that something had crashed there and that there's a big fire, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And you know, they didn't stop and have a little in-between time or anything. It just kept going. So then they said that some, I will say, beings had gotten out of this crash thing, and they were starting to take over the area. And in the meantime, we had really liked this man that was announcing this story, and they had killed him. Well, when they killed him, we became alive, believe me. Now, I'm telling you, we believe this 100%. So then we started turning it up, and the old folks were awake, and we started listening. If any of you ever heard War of the Worlds, yes, that's what it was. And you know what? It's hard to believe anyone would ever believe that, but we believed it 100%. So after it kept getting worse, my mom and dad remembered that my teenage brother was home alone, and me and Bruce were thinking of his family, and so we decided we're all going to get out and go and tell our families what's going on. So, okay, so we jump out of bed. Now, there's 4 of us in the dark with flashlights. The men are getting their pants on, you know, they've got their long johns on, they're putting their clothes on. I'm not even changing. I just get my coat on, and I'm ready to go. So anyway, we go back out of the woods, and we go a little bit faster than we did on the way up. And so we get down to Natural Bridge, New York, and it had increasingly gotten worse, the situation. And so my mom and dad had followed us, and they were going to go on and go to Carthage. And so my husband, we stopped, and I went and hugged my mom and dad, thinking it was the last time I would ever see them. So anyway, he said to me, do you want to go with your mom and dad? And I thought, well, that's a weird question. I said, no, I'm married to you. I'm yours. I'm staying here. But I did go tell them goodbye, thinking I wouldn't see them. So anyway, after they left, we turned and went down to his house in Natural Bridge. We never went to the driveway. We went right up across the lawn, right to the porch. He jumps out with his gun in hand. We run in the house, and we said, the Martians are coming. And they might have thought we were drinking, I don't know. But anyway, we look over, and on TV is Johnny Carson. And we said, something is not right here. And his uncle was there, and he said, you guys, he said, you've been fooled. He said, this is a prank that they did years ago. And years ago, people had killed themselves because they believed it. Well, we felt a little foolish, but yeah, you know, that's the way it was. So we got dressed and went to our apartment. We didn't go back up to camp. And we really felt kind of funny, but anyway, after that, a few days after that, I had a miscarriage. But I thought, Lord, what would we be bringing kids into? What would we have to offer them if this, if this is what it is? And so then shortly after that, we decided we wanted to go to church. And we started at a church where he had been taken by his grandmother and grandfather. And it was just a little small church in Carthage. And we decided we wanted to go to church. But in the meantime, we had started watching Billy Graham. And when Billy Graham gave the invitation, we accepted the Lord. And that was a good thing. And so then we started attending church at a small church, and we went. And one day on Bruce's way home, he stopped into a bar. We were still drinking, hadn't been convicted in any way. And he sat down, and this was one of the first miracles that in our lives. He went in, sat down, nobody in there except him and the bartender. And the bartender went out back. And as he sat there, he heard someone say, "You're a good example, aren't you?" He looked around, no one was there, no one. And he picked his glass back up and he started to drink it. And again, it said, "What kind of an example are you?" And he set it down, and that was the end of that. And we never touched it again. And people think, "Are you crazy?" Well, yeah, I am. You all know that. But after that, then we started going to church, and we were serious. We had 3 children. We had 2 boys and a girl. And we went to church every time there was a service, actually. And we had found many people that came after we started the church. There really were no young couples there with us. But we had 2 older couples that took us under their wing. And they really just were so good to us. And as we went on, I remember the first people we told, because we had stopped going out with people that we were going out with. And some of them were our very good friends, our best friends. And so one night we decided that we had to go tell them why we don't go with them anymore. So we did. We went and told them, and we said, we have accepted Jesus as our Savior, and we're not going to go those places anymore. And so about 2 weeks later, they showed up at our church. And in a month, they were saved. And we just started this, it seems like it just was a ripple. And we all had friends, and they just started coming. And so when we were young and had young children, we had many, many people to, number one, we started a Bible study on Friday nights. And at first we took all of our kids. And to your young moms, oh, I know how you feel. Because we would be there, and it was like one of us would pop up to go stop the fighting in the other room. One of us would go out. So then finally one time I said, "You know what?" I said, "What if we made this a date night for this Bible study, and we got babysitters, all of us, and we just came." And we started going, and we would have up to 25, 30 people. Wow. And we went every Friday night. I don't know when we really stopped. I mean, it was a long time. It was a great time. And in that time, we grew a lot. And we decided, that it was a good time to really, really depend on God. And did we have a perfect family? No way, no way. We didn't have a perfect family any more than anyone else does. We have things that happened that were hard. We had things that happened that were wonderful. And so one thing that happened that I feel us being saved was a miracle. Who would ever think you believe such a silly thing? And here God used it. And when Bruce stopped drinking, that was a big, big plus for us. And so then later on, our daughter was somewhere around 10. And I noticed that she constantly walked on her toes all the time. And you know, at first when she done it, I didn't think anything of it. I thought, oh, she's just being a ballerina type girl, you know. And so then one day I said to her, Heather, I want you to put your feet down. Well, the girl could not put her feet down without falling over. And so then I talked to Bruce, and we decided, you know, we need to take her to a doctor. So we took her to a regular doctor, and he said, I'm going to set you up with an ortho group. And he set that up really fast. And we went down there, and it was Dr. Curtis. I don't know if any of you remember him in Watertown, but he was a wonderful man. So we went down, and he says to, you know, he did some testing on her. And then he said, I'd like you to wait here in this room for a few minutes. I want to make a couple calls. And so we said, okay, you know, we're pretty dumb. We just said, okay. So we're sitting there, and then he comes back in and he says, well, I have to wait for this doctor to call me back. And so he called back, and then he said, I want you to be in Syracuse tomorrow morning. And we said, okay. And we're still pretty dumb. You know, we didn't take anything with us. We just thought we're going down to Syracuse, see this doctor, and come home. And so we went in, and Dr. Owens was a young doctor then in Syracuse, and was a neurosurgeon, and he did all sorts of tests on her. He put her right in the hospital, and did all sorts of tests on her. And one of the things they did, they would scrape her feet with needles. And that poor girl, whenever she would see him coming, she'd shut her eyes and pretend she was asleep. And so I began to ask right away, do you have any needles? And when they'd say no, she'd get right up. Well, after he had done his testing, he told us that he felt that she either had a brain tumor or, well, I'm trying to think what the other thing was. It was something with her spine. And so he said, I want to do, somebody that's a nurse help me when they drain this fluid out. So anyway, he wanted to do that procedure. And so he did. And he came back and he said, well, he said, I feel like your daughter has this disease. Never did write it down. I wished I would have, but I didn't. And he said, there really is no cure for it. And she will die. And that was hard. And so before they had done that test, Bruce and I had prayed for healing for her. And sorry, as long as we doctored with her, we would go to him and he'd say, I don't understand it. She has this disease, but she hasn't went one little bit further with this disease. And it was years, and actually, when she was in 11th grade, Dr. Curtis was seeing her also, and he said, you know, I want to try something to let her foot down, her feet down. And he said, but I'm going to be honest with you, I do not know if it's going to make her have a foot that will work perfectly, or if she will always drag her foot. Tough decision. And so anyway, we all decided that we would do one foot. And that way she would at least have one good foot. So we did that. And she has never had a reoccurrence in her life. And so God is so faithful. When he fixes something, he fixes it. And so as we went on in our lives, God was just there. Were we perfect? No. But we always would serve him. So then, about 10 years ago, my husband was doing a job for a man that we knew that had cancer, and he owned this store down in Carthage. And he said, I've got some work on the drain pipe. And he said, I need to get that fixed. It's ruining the inside ceilings. So Bruce said, okay, I'll go down and do it. It happened to be our granddaughter's birthday. So he took the truck and went down, and he was working on it. And I was fixing what I was taking to the birthday party. And it was later afternoon, and I got a call. And he said, listen, I'm over at the hospital. He said, I fell off the scaffolding and landed on my foot. And I'm pretty sure I've broke my ankle. And so I said, okay. And so this being the man in the family, he said, now don't come over here till you go over to that parking lot and pick up all my tools. He says, you know, there's a lot of money laying out there in the parking lot. So I said, okay, I'm obedient. Yes, I am. He might not think so, but I am. So anyway, I went down, and when I got there were lots of tools, and some of them were heavier than what I could lift. And so I thought, well, okay, so I'm not very shy. So I went into the store, and there was a woman at the counter and another woman standing there. And they asked me, you know, what I wanted. I said, well, my husband was working out here, and I said he fell, and he's at the hospital, and I need to pick up his tools, but would you have a man, because they're heavy. Now, this little thing that's standing there in front of me is no bigger than I was, and I was littler then. And she says, come on, honey, I'm a construction worker, let's go. She went out, and in about 10 minutes, she had all that stuff in the truck. And so God provides for us. He gives us what we need when we need it. So anyway, then I went over to the hospital, and number one, he had an orthopedic surgeon from Fort Drum on call. And so he was the one that saw my husband. And he said, after seeing the x-ray, he said, I know we cannot do anything here for your husband. He said, we're going to need to send him to Syracuse right away. And so he made the arrangements, and then he told us, and I'm so thankful for this. He said, now when you get down there and you unwrap this bandage, he said his foot is going to look horrendous. It's going to have huge, he said, so you understand it'll look like blood blisters. And he said that happens when when you land on your feet, when you fall a long distance. And he said, so I don't want you to be frightened when you see that down there. You know, he said, because it will really look bad. And I'm so glad, because when they undid it, he was not exaggerating at all. And so anyway, we had a doctor come in, and he looked at it, and he was from SOS, I guess is what it's called. What a wonderful man. And you know, it's funny because we just felt in God's hands right away. And so he looked at him, and he looked at everything, and he told us, not the first day, but the second day, he said, you know, he said, there is a surgery I could do for this injury. But he said, your husband is diabetic, and he said, I can almost guarantee that he will lose his foot. So he said, I will not do that surgery. Now he said, I'll tell you now, you could go down the street to another doctor and they will do it. But he said, I am afraid you'll lose your foot. And you know, it's funny because it was so peaceful. We just trusted this man. We knew he was telling us the truth. So we decided, no, we're gonna go home and we're gonna just, you know, live with it. And so I think that time he was 6 weeks on the couch. He couldn't do anything. And then, and he still has trouble on uneven land. And it hurts a lot more now that, you know, he's older. I imagine there's a lot of arthritis in there. And the doctor did tell us way back then that if needed, he could go in and do a minor surgery, and that would not be invasive. And that would help him if it got so he couldn't stand the pain. But so far we've been doing what we do. And so that was good. And to me, all the things that God put in place, the right person, you know, where they needed to be, when we needed them, it was perfect. And we never doubted that God had put things in order. And that was good. And we did really good for a few years. And we were working around the house, trying to get our house all fixed, because we're getting older. You might not know that, but we are. So we decided we want to fix our house and get it all set so that when we can't do it, it'll be all right. So we started doing that, and part of that was we did a lot of work in the garage. It was an old garage, a dirt floor, and so we dug it all out, put cement in. And when we put the cement in, there was a little bit of cement left. Well, you know, you don't want to waste it. And we had a back shed, and that's where we keep our wood for the stove. So Bruce said, well, why don't we pour cement there, and it'll keep it better, bringing it out and everything. Sure, I'm agreeable. You know, I don't do anything but watch them do it. so we poured that cement, and about 2 weeks later, my husband was up on the back roof of the garage, and he was putting the final screws into the roof. Well, he was there, and I had gotten a call. Well, actually, I had walked out just before that. It was right around noon, and I asked him, are you ready for lunch? And he said, well, I'll be ready in about 10 minutes. I'll be down. He said, I'm almost done here. So I said, okay. So I went in, and in the meantime, we had been working for Mennonite Disasters for quite a few years. And I had gotten a call from them, and the man asked if we could go out again and work for them. And I said, well, I told him Bruce is working out on the garage, but I said, when he comes in, I'll ask him. And it's funny because the minute I hung up, my husband called me. And I thought, why is my husband calling me? And I thought, oh, I know, I bet he's going downtown to get something and wants me to get lunch on. So I picked up the phone and I said, hey, what's up? And he said, I don't know. He said, come out back. Well, I knew it wasn't good. So I went out, and I found him in a pool of blood at his head. He had fallen off of that roof and hit his head on the cement. So it took me about 2 minutes to call 911. I said we need an ambulance right away. And so I talked with Lewis County, and they were sending one right out. And so then in the meantime, I happened to remember that it was my daughter-in-law's day off. So I called her up, I said, Erica, can you come over? And she knew that I needed her, and she came. And so she was there. And you know, the funny things we talk about when everything is fine. And one thing Bruce and I talked about was, don't ever call a helicopter for me, because it costs too much money. And I mean, we had talked about that so much. And so, okay, so the ambulance comes, and they are assessing him. And so they told us right away that they were calling a helicopter. And of course, Nancy, no, she doesn't ever shut her mouth. And she said, no, we can't. We always said it's too much money. We're not going to. And I thought, what did they think of me? Here my husband is hurt seriously, and I say, no. And so anyway, after a few minutes, then I come to that. You know, we needed a helicopter. So my daughter-in-law said, why don't you go in and pack a few things? So I went in the house and packed some clothes and got my charger and different things I knew I'd want at the hospital. And they got him ready and got him in the ambulance. And then my daughter-in-law had called her daughter because she didn't want me to drive. Now, I really could have driven, seriously, but I let them humor me. And so her daughter got in and we got in, and the ambulance crew tried to get them to come to our house, and they would not. And they said, no, that's too far. And so then they said, well, go to Lewis County and we'll meet you in the parking lot. No, that's too far. So then they wanted us to go to Adams. And the ambulance guy says, listen, we're going to go over to, it went from me, Jeepers. I knew I would forget this. I should have wrote it down. On 177 anyway. And that's where the helicopter would always come to pick people up. And they said, we'll go there. And they said, well, you get here now. Because I didn't realize at the time you have only a certain amount of time with a brain bleed to get help. And so anyway, so all right, so we took off and went out, and we got there, and it's really funny because the minute we got there, my granddaughter said there's a helicopter. So it was there at the very same time, and they landed, and so then one of my first questions was, can I go in the helicopter? And they said no. So my daughter-in-law was there, and my granddaughter was with me, and I said, Erica, would you stay here? I want to get going. Because I wanted to try to be in Syracuse close to the time when he got there. And she said, yep, I'll stay here, and I'll make sure he's in there, and then I'll come. And I said, okay. So I let my granddaughter drive as far as Adams Center, and I said, Regan, Grandma wants to drive. No, Mommy will kill me. I said, Mommy will never know, and I want to drive. I said, I do not want you getting a ticket, and I can tell you right now, I want to go faster. And so I said, I'm asking you to please let me drive. So she said, okay. So she let me drive, and when we got, I think we were 11 miles out of Syracuse, the helicopter called me and said, we're just landing on the roof in Syracuse. And they told me where to go the minute I got there. And so, okay, so we go right along, and we get there, and we pull into the parking lot. Very first slot is wide open. Amen. So we pull in there, and I said, okay, I know where to go, let's go. So we went over, and we went, and got in there, and he was already down having a CT scan. And then when he came back, the nurse came in, and she said, well, with a brain bleed, we have to keep them so many hours to make sure the bleed has stopped. If it has not stopped, then we would do surgery. And I said, okay, I mean, we're always, you know, yeah, you're gonna do what they say. And so anyway, they brought him back there, and at that point, there were 4 of us in the room, and we had already had like 3 people come next door, you know, you're just the curtain. And so while we were sitting there, the nurse came over and she said, we're gonna have to use part of your room. We're so sorry. There's gonna be a lot of people next door here. We're sorry, but we just have got an emergency. We said, do whatever you gotta do. So when they came in, of course, they're gonna talk into their, whatever they have to do to keep a record of what's going on. It was a 14-year-old girl who had been hit by a car, and she had flatlined in the parking lot. And they were trying to bring her back. And they tried and tried. And so finally we said, hey, a lot of my other kids and grandkids were out in the waiting room. And we called out, we said, listen, you guys get praying. We started praying. And it was about 10 minutes, but they brought her back. And so, you know, you listen a little bit, but as soon as she came back, as soon as she came back alive, all we heard was that she was paralyzed from the neck down. She was internal bleeding badly, and they were taking her right up into surgery. So they took her out, and then the nurse said, well, we would like you, because you live so far away, we would like you to stay here the night. And around 4 o'clock this morning, we will know if the bleed has stopped. If it has not, we'll take you into surgery then. So we said, okay, and my kids were still all there, and some of my grandkids, and so then when we finally got the room a few hours later, then they all went up with me until they got him settled. And then I told them, you know, you guys go home. I am fine. I said, I will be fine. Well, they wouldn't leave me alone, so they left my youngest son there with me because he had his own business and he didn't have to be to work. He could, you know, take some time off. So anyway, he stayed with me, and we went in where my husband was, and there was a couch there and a recliner, and we made ourselves at home. And so that was fine. And then at 4 o'clock, no, it was a little before 4, because I didn't know what was going on yet. And she said, well, you know, nobody's supposed to be in here. And she said, would one of you leave? And so, you know, I told my son, I said, if you want to go home, I will be fine no matter what. Go home. He said, no, I'll go out and wait in the waiting room till we hear something. So about 4 o'clock, they came in and they said the bleed had stopped. So they said, you probably can go home tomorrow. And so, you know, so that was that. And my son stayed till light, and then he went home. And then I think it was mid-afternoon before we got discharged. And we went back home, and for 10 weeks, my husband had to sit on the couch. He could not read, he could not watch TV, he could not have visitors. And it was, my husband is just miraculous, because he will do to the T what someone tells him to do. And he was excellent. And there was one friend after a few weeks that came, and he hardly visited with him, but he just was there. He was just a good friend. And after that, he would stop every day just to make sure everything was okay. And that friend was the same friend that while we were gone in the beginning, went back up to the house, took all his tools and put them away, and cleaned up the blood that was on the smell. I can't tell you how wonderful that was when I come home, not to have to do that. But we just know that in all of these things, God is there. And you know, we think sometimes, does God really know what's going on? He does. And we feel deep in our heart that it wasn't as much about Bruce getting hurt as it was about the 14-year-old girl that graduated this last year. She has a little bit of a strange gait, but other than that, and I should have told too that in the beginning when we didn't know who it was, my son, who is a geek on computers, and he just thinks of everything, and he thought, I'm gonna look up accidents in Syracuse. So he found out who she was, found out she still was alive, and so then after quite a while, we got on her Caring Bridge, and so we could keep track of her. And we actually sent her mother a message and told her. And so it was just good that God is there. He's there in the big things, the little things, bad things, great things. He's with us. And even in the beginning, who would ever think that you would come to him because you thought the Martians had landed? And I said, you know, even today, if the Martians land, I don't care. I already been there. So trust God. And if you don't know God, I don't know all of you real well, but if you don't know God, seek him out, because he is the answer and the only answer. And I thank you for having me.